Hey guys, and welcome to CANNAMAntv. My name is Connor McLeod. In this episode, I speak with the CEO of Unyte Capital and Technical Director for Unyte Hemp, Jamie Bartley. In this interview, we discuss what Unyte Capital Group is and its plans for the future, Unyte Hemp and how it predicts the UK cannabis industry will look in 18 months' time, sequestration and phytoremediation properties of hemp, innovation in the hemp industry, a potential Cannabis Industry Bureau in the UK and what this step indicates, and the emerging adult use market in the UK. Make sure and like and subscribe and join us on Patreon, where you can help to build a stronger cannabis media platform. Now then, let's talk cannabis. Hi Jamie, how you doing?
Yeah, good. Thanks yourself.
I'm not bad. I love the background. Excellent stuff.
yeah, you should get a smile on people's faces.
Yeah, dynamite, man. That's even authenticity for the interview here. Brilliant. Just say that was like we're recording Jamie from the middle of Europe here, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, we're a little bit ahead of the game here. It's not even in the ground yet, but it will be probably late this week. To be fair, we'll be drilling the seed. So not far away.
That's fucking dynamite, Jamie. Thank you so much for coming on the channel.
No, not at all. No, happy to get involved on it.
What was it that actually made you active in hemp in the first place?
So I initially started looking at hemp because it's phytoremedial properties. So I come from a contaminated land background. I've dealt a lot with contaminated land remediation and construction and development. And hemp's a great crop to actually clean up poor quality land. It's what they call hyperaccumulates heavy metals, so it can absorb a lot more heavy metals than most plants can, and organic contaminants like hydrocarbons. And that means that then there's a sustainable way to go and clean up large areas of poor quality land. It's a really viable option. But as soon as I started researching hemp in a bit of detail, I suddenly realised actually it is so much more this crop can do. It's an amazing crop and it's got so much potential. And I suppose I saw the stars aligning to a certain degree, whether it be microplastics, whether it be the global understanding of trying to decarbonise and achieve net 2050 targets, etc. So I just saw it as a real opportunity for hemp to be the solution again, and it has been for thousands of years historically for so many different problems. And now it's a case that we've had a 100-year blip during Prohibition, and that's probably what it will get looked at in the future. That crazy 100 years when hemp wasn't really sort of used as a solution that it can be.
Yeah. I like to think that as well, Jamie. You look back on these past 100 years, this is the century of ignorance regulating the cannabis.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think people are realising now that there's that global awareness coming, whether it be hemp, whether it be medical cannabis, recreational cannabis, call it what you want. I mean, there's that awareness that actually maybe the prohibition came around because of commercial influences rather than actual protection of human health or the public or protection of the environment.
So before we get cracking on Unyte Hemp, could you describe just Unyte Capital generally and what it is they're attempting to achieve in the next few years?
Yeah, certainly. So, I mean, we formed the Unyte Capital Group back in 2018, started revenue generating August 2019 as a group. So we've got quite a diverse group of companies. We're very much focused on improvement in the environment, improvement of human health. So within the group, we've got Unyte Waste, which is a construction and waste management company. That's my previous business, which focuses predominantly on contaminated land remediation, but we also get involved in demolition, large bulk earth moving, etc. We've also got Unyte Energy. So Unyte Energy works under the Ofgem Eco scheme, so retrofit insulation into existing properties, and that's one of our larger sectors. But also, it's a big growth sector with regards to decarbonising the existing housing stock in the UK. And we've also, one of the products we're looking to bring to market from the hemp is a carbon negative hemp insulation. So it gives us direct route to market to go and install that product into lots of properties straight away for our supply chain. We've got Unyte Medical. So Unyte Medical is focused on medical cannabis. Working with Professor Mike Barnes and Hannah Beacon, both shareholders in the business, and very much looking to provide cost-effective access to as many patients as possible to quality cannabinoid medicines. Yeah. So again, that's a growing sector. We see there's a lot of movement there in the future. We've got some really interesting research pieces we're just putting together and looking to roll those out fairly shortly, and also looking to start cultivation commercially and then providing that to the UK and European sectors. Unyte Hemp's another startup that we're very much focused around multiple uses of hemp into different sectors. So we've predominantly focused on construction initially because it's a high volume end user, so therefore we can grow lots of hemp and have a big disruptive impact in decarbonising construction materials. Plus, construction is it's an industry that it's still building the same techniques we have done for thousands of years with the same materials. It's very high embodied carbon products that we currently use. So trying to provide viable volume bio-based alternative materials we think is a real opportunity, and we're engaged on various different projects, both with house builders but also schemes like HS2, where we're looking at providing hemp fibre for reinforced concrete, which will allow HS2 to decarbonise in a real big way, because of every tonne of fibre they use is 4 tonnes of carbon left in the soil as deep soil carbon sequestration. So that's a real viable volume end user as well. But not just focused on construction as well, looking at producing graphene, looking at producing hydrogen, looking at producing textiles. So really sort of trying to provide volumes of materials at the right price point into multiple different sectors.
Yeah.
And then a lot of international projects we're consulting on as well, which are various different scales and sizes and end users, depending on which country and which project we're looking at.
Yeah, no, I was really just looking over for obviously doing a wee bit of research for the interview, Jamie. It was extremely exciting because you're applying a really innovative approach to the industry. I mean, you're actually, every spectrum is extremely diverse, the outlook that you're embracing, which is really encouraging because it gives a strong indicator that the industry is here to stay.
Yeah, absolutely. That's how we see it. I mean, the big piece is education. I mean, exactly as you're doing, Colin. I mean, you can't have enough factually correct information out there, because ultimately it's very easy to forget when you're in the industry and you're talking about hemp and cannabis all day, every day, that actually to a lot of people it's still a negative word, and their instant reaction is still that's a bad thing, or maybe more so with hemp, it's that's a hippie thing. It's just trying to explain to people that no, it's not the case. Look at and we try and do that through evidence, and it was science and factually proven data and research. We're working with 9 different universities. We've just finished a Innovate UK and KTM business accelerator as Unyte Hemp as well for biotechnology. But we just see proving the business case, proving the environmental case, proving the human health case, and if we can do those elements, that's the bit that will really ensure that it's a long-term robust solution.
Yeah. I mean, some people might find it quite intimidating, words like phytoremediation or sequestration. Could you give a layman's breakdown of why hemp is so important with these two processes?
Yeah, certainly. So, I mean, if we start off with the carbon side of it, so there's lots of atmospheric carbon dioxide that both humans emit, but also lots of industrial processes and lots of different industries emit large volumes of. And that carbon dioxide needs to come out of the atmosphere, and plants absorb that. So it's called sequestration, but that means they absorb that carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, and then they store some of that carbon in the actual biomass of the plant, so what we call the above ground biomass. So that's the actual physical plant. But then also a lot of that carbon, actually 60% of the carbon absorbed, is then stored in the soil through the root mass, and that's called long-term deep carbon soil storage. And that's very important, because that actually locks up the carbon and doesn't then get emitted through tillage of fields, etc., ploughing of fields and general agricultural practices. So that's quite important, because hemp, compared to most other crops or most other trees, etc., it absorbs so much more than the alternatives. It's 20 tons per hectare grown is the actual figure that it'll absorb. And when you compare that to, say, a rainforest, that's 25 times the carbon that a rainforest absorbs in the same period of time. So it's quite phenomenal when you start looking at how we can have a big impact in removing that carbon from the atmosphere, and then some of that's stored in the crop. So if you use that crop for a construction material, you're storing that carbon again long term into that building envelope. And the phytoremediation, that purely means it's a natural plant way to clean up. So remediation is a fancy word for clean up, and phyto is another terminology that's applied to when a plant does that. So phytoremediation basically means plant cleanup, and that can apply to different types of contamination, or it could be pesticides, for instance. They even used hemp in Chernobyl to clean up some of the radioactive contamination that was present after the accident, the nuclear disaster in Chernobyl. So it's that's what the phytoremediation side of it comes from.
So personally, Jamie, what do you see as the most exciting aspect of the emerging hemp and cannabis industry at this moment in time?
I think really that it can be the solution that multiple sectors need. I mean, I often say to people and challenge them and say, what industry are you in? And I'll tell you how hemp can be a viable solution because of the volume of biomass it produces in its growth period, because of the amount of carbon it absorbs, and because of its versatility of the fibres and the shiv, the cellulose content. It's got so much potential into bioplastics as well. So I really see it as being a solution into multiple sectors, and that's, I think, the most exciting thing around the future for the hemp crop.
Yeah. What do you think the most inhibiting factors are? I mean, excuse me, the 1% issue obviously has been it's an ongoing issue at the moment. Do you see that is that crucial? Is that central when it comes to inhibiting hemp's potential?
I think it certainly is an inhibiting factor that we're limited to 0.2% THC content. I mean, naturally, the landrace cultivars, so that's the natural cultivars that used to grow in the UK before eradication and before prohibition, were around 1 to 6% THC. So that shows us what would naturally grow here best. And obviously, we're in a time of climate change. As temperatures increase, a lot of cultivars will actually increase their THC limit. So it's not even a case of necessarily changing cultivars. It's actually just increasing the limit to ensure that we can still grow those cultivars compliantly without exceeding any of the THC limits due to the climate change and the increase in temperatures and decrease in rainfall, etc., that we're experiencing.
Do you think that things like hempcrete, you already mentioned that hemp-related insulations obviously emerging in the sector, do you think hempcrete and other building materials will essentially take the place? Is that just a hope, or do you think that's a practical expectation?
I think if we do it at enough scale, it can be adopted. I mean, one of the things we've identified is to be a mainstream construction product, for instance, a hempcrete block or an insulation, you need to be doing it at the right scale. Otherwise, you're not going to be cost comparable. I mean, our processing facility will need 5,000 acres a year as a feedstock. But then if you look at the volume of building materials, for instance, that we utilise, or the bricks, construction materials, etc., there's enormous volumes there that are needed. So we would have to cultivate a lot of hemp to 100% replace. But equally, I think we've got to start somewhere, and without people starting to do it at the right scale, and house builders adopting those materials, or end users like HS2 adopting those different products at scale, we're never going to get anywhere. And I think that there is the clock's ticking now that all those industries have to achieve their targets, and if they don't, there's going to be big financial penalties for them as well. So I think that will drive them to now really look for the alternatives.
When you've got local, small scale business groups, do you think how would you recommend that they became active in engaging with hemp as a viable option?
I think really just, I mean, engage with someone that's cultivating it. I mean, we're very open to collaborating and partnering. We're very big on sort of educating, so I'm happy to help assist people with any sort of project plans, and we do get involved in lots of different sorts of sizes and types of projects around hemp, whether it be just an end user wanting to look at a specific product, or whether it be someone, a group looking to actually set up a facility and seed to end product processing facilities. So we understand a lot of the technologies available globally, and we understand their pros and cons. So certainly, I think probably reach out to people that are involved in the industry. There's some really valuable knowledge in some of the trade associations as well. So potentially reach out to some of the trade associations would be another good starting point. And really try and, I think that the danger with hemp and cannabis is Google and YouTube can be a dangerous place to go learning if you're not careful. I mean, so if you're going to go and do research, I'd suggest looking at peer-reviewed research papers. There's a lot of them out there. They're all accessible, and that's certainly where I started doing a lot of my knowledge finding and learning.
Innovation, yeah, that's what I was going to say. You mentioned at the beginning of the interview the research basis that you're engaged with several universities. Can you talk a little bit about that and what's actually going on at the moment?
Yeah, certainly. So I mean, there's various different research pieces. Some are around sort of quite specific uses. So high tensile fibers use in biocomposites and structural reinforced concrete repairs. And then some of the other research pieces around polymerization of the hemp shiv to turn the shiv into starch, and then polymerize that starch into what they call PLA, polylactic acid, which is a bio-based plastic. So it's an alternative to petrochemical-based plastics. So there's a lot, and then there's some research as well around different cultivars performance, how those cultivars perform, and then the carbon. We're also validating the carbon with Brownfield at the moment as well.
Yeah, no, it's really exciting that this is all going on, because obviously this is, like I said, branching out into different spectrums of society, different factors of industry. Recreationally speaking, do you have a direction for a recreational market. I think Professor Mike Barnes has got his white paper, which is going to be getting released soon, and I think he included something like a Cannabis Bureau, which speculated to have a unified approach towards the cannabis industry generally. I mean, how do you see yourself interacting with that kind of format?
Absolutely. I mean, we're very open to engaging. I mean, we work closely with Mike on multiple different projects, and are heavily involved in the Cannabis Commission that Mike's to roll out as well. So no, we're fully supportive, and we think longer term, there's no reason there shouldn't be adult use access available. It doesn't necessarily just have to be down a regulated medical route as well, because I think there's enough anecdotal evidence out there that many people do treat themselves on a daily basis with various different cannabis derived products. So I think longer term, I think that would make a lot of sense, definitely.
One of the good things as well that's noticeable is that even when I said that they're recreational, it's like that's no longer the PC collective term, really. It's now adult use, because it kind of implies a derogatory teenage level element of the substance, you know.
Absolutely. And again, I think it's just about that education. People there's a lot of mindsets to change or to educate, and where we are at the moment is a lot of those mindsets are probably the ones that are key decision makers. So I think it's like anything, like any emerging industry, you need to engage with those stakeholders. You need to discuss any concerns they have, and show them, again, factually correct evidence or scientific proof to allay any concerns. And I think that through doing that and through sensible engagement, then you get a long-term viable change that's realistic and ultimately going to benefit humans.
So what do you see in the next 18 months? Obviously, Corona has been extremely inhibiting, to say the least, in the past 2 years. Everything just slowed down. Everything begins now. It's perfect time with spring. It seems to be now coming into season. What do you see happening over the next 18 months?
I think there's a real opportunity for, especially in the UK at the moment, hopefully hosting COP26 as a live event. We've been heavily involved in supporting health and environment management projects. We've applied for multiple different activations at the COP26 event. So that's a unified application between various different trade associations and then a couple of businesses such as ourselves. And that's to do things like hosting a educational and entertainment space outdoors, a Hemp Creek stage with various different sort of large performing artists that would then stream globally as one of the options, and then educational events inside 2x2 stands where we've got a lot of various different, just trying to educate across all the multiple different benefits that hemp can have on the environment. So things like that, I think, could be a real opportunity to showcase what solution it can be globally. And I mean, I think there's a real movement coming now. I mean, I'm constantly having phone calls on a daily basis. So I had one this morning in Singapore, various different projects where people are looking from a governmental level as well, and an investment level. And ultimately, any of these things are viable with hemp. A lot of the projects, the big barrier is investment, but I think that investment is also seeming to line up now as well. And if the investments come in, the technologies are there, the end user needs there, and the wants there, then I think we're going to see a real acceleration of a lot of international hemp projects over the next 18 months.
There's actually, as we say, investments. I think Northern Leaf had I think it was like a £14 million IPO startup, I think, at their beginning, which far exceeded their expectations, which kind of obviously showed. And that was, I think it was Isle of Man, perhaps within New Jersey. That shows where the market's at. I mean, people are potentially undermining what's going to be happening.
Yeah, I think absolutely. I mean, if you look at some of the recent IPOs since the LSE's opened up, there's some very crazy valuations going on, but it shows there's an interest and there's a desire for the market sector. And I suppose there has been very much a lot of focus on the medical side and cultivation and CBD as well. Yeah. And I see, as much as those are very viable markets, I see actually the larger end use markets are the things like construction, biofuels, hydrogen production. Those are ultimately where hemp, I think, is going to be a real big disruptive impact as well.
I mean, so do you think that hemp could potentially provide a new domestic market for those kind of avenues? And very often, obviously, you had the independence debate, Scotland, England separation, and then obviously that brought in the economic conversation of where's the money going to come from on both sides of the border. You know, do you think this is something that could bring a new revenue that's going to essentially impact internationally when it comes to Scotland and England collectively?
Very much so. I mean, if you look at the impact on a crop rotation, so when you use hemp in an agricultural crop rotation, it has a follow-on crop yield increase of about 15 to 18%. And that's because it breaks up the compaction in the soils, it increases the attenuation, so the soil's ability to store water, and also the aeration. And all of those naturally increase the follow-on crop yield, so that makes farmers more productive. And also because you've got so many end users, it's not going to get commoditized necessarily. So the price for barley or for wheat, etc., will always be fairly fixed and commoditized. But actually, if you're producing hemp fibre, there's so many different uses that fibre can go into. You're not necessarily going to see a commoditization as quickly. So that increases the value as a farming crop, and also because of the yields as well, because it yields so well in the UK. That also then means that you've got a very viable yielding crop, which has obviously a benefit there with the end users and the commercial aspect of it.
What do you see could potentially come out the woodwork? Everybody's covering the grounds of what could innovation. Do you see something potentially just coming that nobody's expected with hemp, with cannabis? Is this something that research is going to lead towards?
I don't necessarily think there's going to be anything that's going to jump out the woodwork that we haven't already seen or researched. I mean, I think when you really look into the level of research that has been done around hemp and cannabis, there's been a lot done. Really has been a lot done, and I think probably some of it hasn't been that well publicised, but there is a lot that's been done. I think even now there's 2,000 plus clinical trials going on around medical cannabis in different formats and different jurisdictions. So I think that sort of research is being done and has been done. I do see end use or high technology end use products. So graphene, for instance, is one that we're very much focused on. You can produce graphene from hemp, which is 30% more cost effective and 20% higher performing. So I think that's got a real potential in things like batteries and also construction materials as well, 3D printing. So I do see some of those end users being very viable, and hemp being a feedstock that is utilised for lots of different emerging technologies as well.
Yeah. No, to be perfectly honest, Jamie, I mean, could you cover a little bit of biofuels and hemp plastics? Because let's say, man, you've absolutely decimated my questions here.
Yeah, certainly. So, I mean, we did quite a bit of research actually on biofuels, and one of the reasons it was our initial plan for the first large processing facility was going to be construction materials, so insulation from the fibre, and we're then going to biorefine the hemp shiv, so that we're going to ferment that to start with, which produces bioethanol. And when you ferment the hemp shiv, the woody core, so if you fermented grain, for instance, which is normally where you produce ethanol from, you get a yield of around 42% bioethanol. But when you ferment the hemp shivs, because of the levels of sugars in there, which are very high, you actually get a 76% bioethanol yield. So it's a bit faster, higher yield in substrate or feedstock than grain would be. But then if you take during the ethanol production, you produce methane as well. And if you take that methane and stick what they call steam reform, so that basically means take the methane and put it through a steam reforming process, and that splits the methane and produces hydrogen. So you've got a very viable option there to produce hydrogen, which is going to be a future feedstock for HGV transport and most large transport, and then also for the national gas grid. We're going to be switching over to 20% hydrogen fairly shortly, and there's talk of trying to get to 100% hydrogen. Because hydrogen burns very cleanly; it only has oxygen water as a waste product, if you like, when it burns. So certainly from a biofuels production and producing either bioethanol or potentially hydrogen as well through SMR, that's a good option because of the yields. But we're also doing a piece at the moment with Drax and a few other entities where we're looking at pelletization trials. And again, I mean, at the moment, a lot of wood pellets are shipped over from Canada and northern USA, which obviously isn't really that sustainable when you're transporting massive amounts of fuels across oceans. Whereas actually, because of the biomass yield that we touched on before, it's 4 times the biomass yield that trees will produce. It then means it's a very sustainable option to potentially produce pellets for power stations as well. Plus, you get that long-term carbon soil storage that we talked about before being offset when you're using the pellets. So there's certainly a lot of potential, I think, in the biofuel sector for hemp to be a feedstock.
Yeah. So it's so exciting when it comes to this stuff, Jamie, because even the thing that popped into mind there was the microchips. I'm pretty certain that they're now thinking about hemp microchips. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's certainly. I think microchips, with regards to the graphene side of things, could be viable. I mean, graphene could be used for both batteries, but then also for things like circuit boards and microchips. So I think, yeah, absolutely, those types of materials, it's going to be a very viable future use for it as well. It's been done at scale at the moment, but certainly is something that we're looking to bring to market at scale.
Yeah. Well, I certainly hope that this year is going to bring in more the emergence of conventions for hemp, CBD, cannabis, things like that, and raise a bit more awareness. Have you got anything left you want to cover before we get going?
But probably just to reiterate, if any of your viewers did want to get involved, or if there's any projects that they feel we might be able to assist with, feel free to reach out via the website. The website's Unyte, unyte.co.uk, and get in contact with myself, and then, yeah, happy to assist.
That's brilliant, Jamie. I'll put all the links in the description box below. And let's say, Jamie, thank you very much for coming on the channel. Have a brilliant day.
Yeah, you two, Connor, all the best. Look forward to catching up again soon.
Thanks to Jamie for giving me his time, and thanks to you for sticking around until the end of the video. I sincerely hope you enjoyed the content. I'll see you next time.